Thank you very much for having us here. I'm speaking on behalf of Human Rights Watch. I'm Phil Robertson. And I want to thank the New York Southeast Asia Network and also Columbia for having us. I saw the poster, it said like the state of human rights in Southeast Asia. So you've got like various different sort of, you got Myanmar, you've got Philippines, you've got Indonesia, and I figure I'll talk about the rest of it. Try to at least, in 10 minutes. Try to give you some overall trends. Human Rights Watch, we've been very busy on a number of different areas. One of the key things we've been doing, and unfortunately my colleague Linda Lockdeer is not here, is working on freedom of expression under threat. And this is quite clearly an overall theme within Southeast Asia that we see. And that's an attack on independent media. It's also an attack in some cases on activists that are speaking up using criminal defamation law. So if you look at, for instance, in Thailand, we still have military in the newsrooms, telling people what they can or cannot broadcast. Philippines, of course, we have them going after Maria Ressa, but they also have them threatening other independent journalists. And I think Philippines still leads Southeast Asia, if not the world, in the number of journalists killed per year. So, a very dubious title. Cambodia, the Phnom Penh Post is gone. Cambodia Daily is gone. Radio Free Asia, journalists are now refugees in Bangkok. There's an ongoing crackdown against social media that is taking place. We just released a report on Burma called Dashed Hopes. This was released on February 1st. And what we found was that there's a wholesale attack on media freedom and also on activists online. That since 2016 in Burma, we have seen over 140 prosecutions under the Telecommunications 66D Act, which is a very, very broad statute that is being used not just by the government, but by NLD MPs and, in fact, neighbors with disputes with each other. So, this is spreading like a very sinister virus. Vietnam and Laos, I don't think I even need to talk about freedom of expression there. In Singapore, we're seeing a renewed crackdown, particularly as Singapore is starting to move towards what will probably be an election sometime this spring, where the fourth generation PAP will be on display for the first time, and they're very eager to make sure that they don't see a drop in their support. And what has happened, of course, is civil society has increasingly moved as the restrictions on press come. They move more of their attention and also their output onto social media. So then we have also crackdowns on social media. We have a Computer Crimes Act that's very, very pernicious in Thailand. It's being used widely. It's become the new go-to law for the government. We just saw one of the political leaders, Thanathorn, from the Future Forward Party, charged on the Computer Crimes Act. Increasingly, actually, even the sort of infamous Article 112, the Les Majest law, we're not seeing that being used in part because of instructions from the palace. But what they do instead is they get you on the Computer Crimes Act instead. And the Computer Crimes Act can, basically, as it says, anything that's put on a computer is subject to its jurisdiction. We have the cybercrimes law that our business and human rights researcher working on the internet says one of the most draconian ones he's ever seen. This is in Vietnam. Singapore and Cambodia, we have cybercrime laws on the way. We even had the anti-fake news law during Najib's Malaysia, which is still waiting to be revoked. It's hung up in the Senate over there. Eventually will go, but it showed where Malaysia was going before this, the Pakatan Harapan victory. We see more and more attacks on NGOs, going after NGO legal presence, access, and finances. The situation in the Philippines that Carlos described. The law on NGOs in Cambodia, which is being used intrusively to limit NGOs' ability to work on certain issues, and basically to intimidate, frankly, NGOs to stay away from certain topics. Vietnam and Laos, of course, are very restrictive on NGOs. Friends of mine who are working for international NGOs in Indonesia are talking about the very difficult time they're having in terms of getting work permits and other things. That has been a real crackdown under the current government. Thailand is trying to throw out the regional office of Amnesty right now. We'll see if that's going to come to pass. So far, Human Rights Watch has not been officially targeted yet. Yes. So stay tuned for that. But then we also look at, when we look at freedom of religion and belief, we're seeing politicization in certain countries of religion for political purposes. So in the case of Indonesia with Prabowo, certainly this was something that Prime Minister Najib was trying to do before he lost the election. And within Burma, of course, we have the politicization of Burmese religion, of Buddhism. The control of, for instance, Thailand and Cambodia over religion is also used to sort of pursue dissidents within the majority religions, whether it be Buddhism or others. And so that's an area that we're looking at. And then we're also seeing a trend of holding elections without really sort of intending to have a change of power or a significant alteration of the dynamic of control in that society. I think when in Malaysia, Najib lost and Pakatan Harapan took over, all the other governments are looking at Malaysia like, okay, how do we make sure that doesn't happen to us? That's the disaster of the authoritarian. All of a sudden he's in court now. Why did you have $27 million in gold, jewels, and cash in designer bags in these condos? We don't know, but this is the sort of thing that he is going to be called out on. And so in Cambodia, we had basically a fake election, an election that was a one-horse race. This was an election where Hun Sen had destroyed the opposition party. Had created or worked with to create a number of what we call the Firefly parties, which are the other parties that stood up. We even had because the European Union wouldn't send an election delegation to monitor the election, we had zombie election monitors come in. We can talk about zombie election monitors if you like. That's a new terminology. Thailand, the election there, I think really, if we look at what the military is trying to do, the tilting of the political sort of playing field, the role of the monarchy, Thailand is moving towards what I would call a guided democracy. And I don't mean that in a positive sense. I mean, similar to the way that we had a guided democracy under Suharto, we're going to have guided democracy under a sort of a military monarchical axis in Thailand. Myanmar is moving towards election 2020. Again, we've got military involvement in that. And in fact, both now in Thailand and in Burma, we have parliaments where there is a specific quota that is provided for the military. That is completely up to the military to determine who will sit there. So you have 1/4 of the parliament in both upper and lower houses in Burma reserved for the military, and you have 250 Senate seats. These people will be involved in determining who is the Prime Minister of Thailand, which means that the military parties really need only to get 126 seats, or 1/4 of the overall vote, in order to select the Prime Minister. And then also we have the Singapore and what I would call the 4th generation PAP election, where nothing is being left to chance. They're going after the opposition parties, they're going after the activists, there's going to be increased restrictions on the media that we're seeing coming down. And finally, I would say that we have the issue of the military unchecked. The sort of things we were just hearing about in Burma. I mean, this is something that the Burmese government the Burmese military, the Tatmadaw, have been doing for years. This is the 4 cuts policy, which has been used really since Ne Win's time against ethnic insurgencies, and they have never been held accountable for that. And that is the big issue there. That Min Aung Hlaing, says like, yeah, well, we're going to deal with the Rohingya. This was a sort of unfinished business. What he means is that it's unfinished business that we had meant to get around to eventually, and so they started to finally do something against us, and so we decided to do that in a systematic way, both in 2012 and then really finishing the deal in 2017. Although, to be honest, there's still a significant number of Rohingya who are still in Rakhine State, in IDP camps. And so there's a possible at some point there could be another wave. We cannot discount that, because the takeaway from 2012 and 2017 is that you can ethnically cleanse the Rohingya and get away with it. And so far they have got away with it. In Thailand, we have the military resurgence. We have the, Apirat Kong Sompong saying, that anybody who talks about cutting the budget should listen to the song Nak Pandin, which of course was the ultra-nationalist song that was used to cheer on the attacks against the communists and also the Thammasat University students in 1976. And in Cambodia, we've done a report called The Dirty Dozen, which I would direct your attention to, which talks about the military and police commanders who've done Hun Sen's dirty work, really since the 1980s. And again, he's more locked in than he's ever been before. In the middle of this, we say, well, what is human rights groups trying to do? What are we trying to do? And what we have to do, Human Rights Watch as an organization, we go to talk to a government. A lot of times the government doesn't want to talk to us, or if we say something to them like, we want you to do this, they're like, yeah, we'll do the opposite, thanks. So we have to, our whole game is trying to convince someone else to go take the message. Someone from the UN, various governments, whether it be someone, European Union and its member states, or New Zealand, or Australia, or Canada. It used to be the United States, but less so now. So what we're always about is trying to build coalitions of people to support change that we have identified that should take place to respect rights. And previously, during the Obama administration, and even during the Bush administrations, and we would go to the United States usually as one of the first ports of call, because the other governments would say, well, what are the Americans doing? And if we could get the Americans on board, we could build a much larger coalition. And the Americans were the embassy in these countries where the government was quite concerned and would listen more intently when the Americans came in and demarched on something. Right now, the Americans aren't there. It's home alone, folks. I mean, these embassies, we still have some people in the embassies who are doing the work, who care about human rights, who understand that there was a bipartisan traditional policy of including human rights as part of the U.S. foreign policy makeup. That's not now the case. So often we're now building new coalitions because there's a big hole in the line. And in countries like Vietnam, which I'm happy to talk about at length, recognize this from the moment that the Prime Minister of Vietnam was invited to the White House by Donald Trump. He went to the White House, he went to the National Security Council, he went to the Department of Homeland Security, and he didn't hear the issue of human rights once. And they said, okay, from our fiercest critic under the Obama administration on human rights, we now have an administration that doesn't mention human rights in any forum, even behind closed doors. So we can do what we want. And that's what they're doing. Thanks.